Hey, what's up, guys? Matt here, coming to you from Laidlaw's Harley-Davidson, here with Nick Culver, and we're going to be talking to you guys today about the 2024 model year CVO Street Glide. And the CVO Street Glide this year is, I think, especially nice, especially considering that they just had a major overhaul just last year. So last year we had the 23 model year CVO Street Glide and Road Glide when they introduced all the brand new content on these bikes, namely the new body style. That's with, all the buzz with Harley-Davidson was about the new fairing, the new Batwing fairing. And so we've now seen all that content return again for a second year. So you got the new body style, all the new lighting on the bike. You got the variable valve timing Milwaukee-Eight with the 121 cubic inch motor, which we're going to be talking about quite a bit. Yeah, the new stereo system, the new infotainment system. There's just a lot to unpack here. We've just seen a lot of big, significant changes being applied to the touring chassis, and the big preview of all that happened last year in the 23 model year.
Halfway through, they launched the CVOs last year, halfway through the new redesigned bodywork. Now, some of that stuff is trickled down to the regular models. And then obviously we also have the Road Glide ST CVO. And so I think it's worthwhile to take a look at this bike again, even though mechanically it's basically the same as it was last year, but its position in the lineup is very, very different now, because previously, if you wanted this fairing, the CVO was the only way to get it, and now you can get a regular Street Glide. But also, if you are a CVO buyer, you're now kind of being pulled in two different directions potentially. You can go in the direction of the ST, but then you're forced into the shark nose fairing, or you can get the more standard CVO model. And as you mentioned, there's a lot of differences. I mean, not only is the engine performance going to be very different between the ST and the CVO Street Glide, but the suspension is set up quite differently. The sound systems are different. So there's a lot of differences between the CVO models now. So, the regular baggers are closer now to the CVOs in terms of you get the new bodywork, you get the same lighting. And so I think that, making the decision now is a little bit more difficult. Last year it was pretty straightforward. Do you want the CVO and do you want the new fairing? Yep. And now it's like, well, does the CVO have the paint that I like? Does it add enough value? Am I gonna utilize that bigger motor? Does the sound system matter to me? Do I like the colors? And so it's more of a traditional CVO year in that sense, in terms of deciding whether or not you want to go all the way up to a CVO or if you want to go with the regular Street Glide. But yep, I think that question is even more difficult in some ways right now, because the Street Glide, the regular Street Glide and the regular Road Glide are so competitively priced that the CVO is a little bit bigger jump than it has been as well. So the CVO didn't get significantly more expensive. It's right in the same ballpark of where it was the last few years, but a blacked out, fully optioned Street Glide being $3,000 less than it was last year. It's definitely the divide between the two models is now larger.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, the base price of a regular Street Glide and Road Glide is $25,999 this year. But I think you bring up a good point. I think a lot of people are going to want to know, okay, what am I getting for that extra premium in price for a CVO? Yeah. And so maybe we talk about that real quick.
So let's run through the bike. Basically, when you go to the CVO over a regular Street Glide, you're getting a larger motor. So, I mean, it's always the first place to start. So instead of the 117 cubic inch without variable valve timing, you're getting a 121 cubic inch motor with variable valve timing. It's got inverted front suspension, fully adjustable rear suspension with a quick preload adjust. So it's a little bit more convenient to add additional preload for a passenger or additional preload for additional gear if you're going on a longer ride. It's got a floating rotor setup with big Brembos up front that are badged as Brembos. The regular baggers do have Brembos, but they don't. It's a different caliper that I think has a little bit better brake feel. Radial mounted, along
monoblock
on those. One of the advantages of the new inverted front end is it's a radial mounted caliper setup, which is nice. More suspension travel than the outgoing old Street Glide Special, like the 23 model year, but the same suspension travel as the current bikes, just more adjustability, and the inverted front end is going to provide a little bit more stiffness. It's just a little bit more of a premium suspension in the front compared to the standard bikes, which still have the traditional 49 millimeter front end.
Yep.
In terms of weight, the bike is heavier than the 24 Street Glide, but it's lighter than the old CVOs. So you are still saving some weight, and they saved the weight in really nice areas. So you've got a really beautiful aluminum triple tree. Gas tank is lighter, and the rotating assembly, actually, the engine itself is lighter. So it revs up a little bit quicker, just a more lively motor than previous Milwaukee-Eights. Some of those benefits did transfer over despite not having variable valve timing to the new 117 when they adjusted it. Liquid cooled cylinder heads, which is the same as the now 24 Street Glide, but is a nice improvement over the precision oil-cooled heads of the 23 models.
That's a big one, by the way. When I rode these bikes in the Valley of Fire in Las Vegas, it wasn't particularly hot out, but one thing I noticed, like right when I got off the bike, I'm usually in a situation where I want to shut that motor off right away because I don't want all that heat to then come up on me when I don't have air passing over the cooling fins. And I didn't feel like I needed to shut it off right away. In fact, I got off it and checked it and did a hand check on it and stuff like that. The engine runs significantly cooler now with that new water-cooled head design. You have a lot less heat radiating up on you, and I don't think Harley-Davidson quantified that in a specific percentage decrease in heat or anything. But I can just tell you, I've ridden a lot of M8s in my days. I've done a lot of miles on them, and I know exactly what kind of heat to expect up on my legs. And it was at least 30, 40, 50% less heat coming up off that motor. So that's a big one that I think a lot of people are just going to be kind of skim across and go over, but that's a big upgrade.
Yeah, it's really noticeable if you're coming from a 23 or older Milwaukee-Eight, but especially if you're a guy who's maybe got a twin cam Street Glide, maybe like a Rushmore one, and you didn't really feel the need to move to the Milwaukee-Eight yet because it was similar infotainment system, same fairing design, same bodywork. So you're like, well, it's a newer motor, but I don't really feel the need. The M8 is significantly cooler, even the old M8, than the twin cam was.
Yeah.
I've sat on both at lights and triple degree temperatures, and it's not fun on the twin cam. And the M8 was dramatically better. But as you mentioned, now with the liquid cooled setup, it's even better. And I think a big component of that is that they reversed the direction of the coolant. So the passage now goes to the rear cylinder first and then to the front cylinder.
Which is the hotter cylinder first,
And it's the one that's closer to you, obviously. So dropping the temperature on that, it's good for performance. It's good for efficiency. It's good for reliability because you're going to keep those temperatures down. And, heat can be an enemy in that sense. And it's just good for rider comfort and gets you more power. It's also consistency, though, too. When you are able to better control the combustion temperature, when you're repeatedly getting on the bike and you're revving it out over and over again, you're going to notice less performance drop. It's a nice improvement. I do have a little bit of a gripe on the Street Glide, just on the left side of the bike. It's not as attractive as it was without that reservoir. And the Road Glide, I think, with the Fang spoiler setup hides the reservoir a little bit better than it does on the Street Glide.
On the CVO version of the Road Glide.
The CVO version of the Road Glide hides it a little bit better. It's a relatively minor gripe. Sound system, just to get into specs again, just so that you know what you're getting versus a regular Street Glide, is a lot more potent than the standard Street Glide would be. You've obviously got much bigger speakers. You've got an additional amp, and you've got the saddlebag speakers as well. So you're running a 4-speaker setup. They're larger, and there's more power behind them.
I'll add to that. You got the metal speaker grills that looks a lot better on the interfering. And that was one of my gripes on my Street Glide and Road Glide review. It's just the interfering just doesn't look quite as nice and polished and premium as the specials of last year or the ST of last year. And so by having that CVO, the upgraded speakers that come with the metal grills and that painted interfering, I just think visually in the cockpit, it just looks a lot more premium.
When you're saving $3,100, versus the previous outgoing year on the regular bike, it makes sense. But if they had done the same thing on the CVO and it had the plastic trim or unpainted interfering, it would just be kind of inexcusable. But it is, I think, a much nicer cockpit view on the CVO, in addition to the sound system being more potent. And then you've got obviously unique wheels on the CVO. It's very similar to a design they've been running for a few years now, which is a cast wheel with spokes. It's very unique in the world of motorcycle wheels. Visually very striking, and I don't know of another manufacturer running a wheel like that. Usually if you've got spoke wheels, it's like a extruded aluminum kind of thing, and these are very unique, very visually unique, and it's two-tone. The bike's with the unique charred chrome finish. It's black with that, and then on a bike that has more chrome on it, it's usually like a kind of a polished or chrome edge cut kind of setup, which is really nice. It's visually really, really striking design, and no 21-inch on the front. There wasn't a 21 historically on the CVO Street Glide, but there's still not a 21.
It's a 19-inch. Yeah, 18 in the rear.
Yeah. With the smaller fender, though, it still visually looks like quite a large wheel, but you don't get the drawbacks of a 21 with a heavier wheel and the thinner profile tire that doesn't ride as nice. So I think that smaller fender makes up for the fact that it's not technically a 21. I'm personally kind of biased against 21s anyways, personally, just for ride dynamic reasons.
The 19 still handles really well. You don't feel like you're compromising much in the way of performance and things. And on that 21, you did start to feel like you compromised a little bit of dipping into turns and things like that. And there was quite a bit more weight. I mean, those 2 inches once you start getting bigger and bigger, you get exponentially heavier, right?
But I can't think of too many other distinctions between the CVO. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of unique finishes on the bike. The entire engine case is finished in a different
you got the adversary collection on there. So a lot of the stuff that you typically would expect from a CVO. Heated grips. So you have the whole adversary collection on there, like I mentioned. So that includes like your hand controls, your foot controls. Yeah, heated grips, like you mentioned.
And then two paint options. So we've got the kind of standard thing they've done now since last year, where you've got the $6,000 premium, and then you've got the standard paint color. What do you think of the paint colors?
I think they're nice. Yeah, the Copperhead this year is the one that you don't have to pay an upcharge for. I think it looks really nice. In terms of just like execution, I think the degree of artistry involved in painting it is kind of similar to the dark platinum that we saw last year, although I feel like the color is a little bit more of a richer premium tone. The legendary orange, kind of a cool color because it actually pays homage to the first touring chassis model in the CVO lineup. So this year, kind of a cool thing, they're celebrating 25 years of CVO history. The first one being back in 1999, which is the FXR. And then the very next year, in the 2000 model year, they had a Road Glide that was painted in legendary orange. And so this paint scheme kind of harkens back, or is a modern interpretation of that legendary orange. And I guess it's a little bit more applicable to the Road Glide because the Road Glide is the model that it was on originally back in 2000. But really cool paint scheme. I like it a lot. And I think if you're willing to pay $6,000 extra, you better like it a lot, right?
Yeah, and it's got some really cool, unique hand-done things, like almost like a brushed aluminum finish, where they literally with a paintbrush are
hand paintbrush,
which is really, really cool. I do wish that there was a middle ground maybe between those two. You know, I feel like the last couple of years with the CVO paint, it's either you're going all out gunslinger, $6,000 for some really cool paint, whether it was the Whiskey Need or the legendary orange this year. But if you don't go in that direction, you're choosing a kind of more normal single color with some pinstriping that honestly, you know, it's beautiful paint and it's well done, but it doesn't feel, in my opinion at least, as distinct from the regular paint jobs as it should. Right?
Yeah, I agree with you. I feel like now Harley-Davidson has a paint job on both sides of the spectrum. You know, they have kind of the minimalist CVO paint job, and they have just kind of like the better than it's ever been paint job on this side of the spectrum. Whereas I think historically speaking, the CVOs have kind of been somewhere in the middle, where you didn't have to pay an upcharge for it. But it's interesting kind of now how they do it. And so it's either you pay no extra or you pay $6,000 extra. But yeah, if you're not paying the premium, your paint job isn't quite as good as CVO paint jobs have been historically, just in terms of like the level of execution it takes to accomplish the paint.
Yeah, it seems like a solid color with some pinstriping, and honestly, that's been stuff that's been on regular bikes in the past. You know, I feel like some of the two-tones that are out right now this model year are a little bit more complicated and probably a little bit more difficult to actually achieve. Some of the paint jobs have been quite subtle in CVOs of past years, but they've always done something to make them just a little bit more distinct, whether it's like the Mako Shark Fade,
extra graphics. They would have like CVO logos on the saddlebags. They'd have that beautiful one on the side of the tank, like in the 19 model year Road Glides.
But you know, you can still get the full-blown CVO paint job if you want it. And some of the guys, they like the more subtle aspects of it. They want all the other nice things about the CVO, and they don't actually want to attract as much attention.
Not everybody wants a bright orange a bike going on the road, but they want all the other the content that comes on the bike. Yeah, definitely.
So that's, I think that's a pretty comprehensive rundown of most of the features that are unique to the CVO. And I guess now, it's a good time to probably just talk a little bit about how they all come together. You've spent a lot of time on the bikes, and I spent a lot of time, I shouldn't say a lot of time on the 24, but I've spent a lot of time on the 23 out in Milwaukee. And this time though, I did get to spend more time with the new infotainment system. When I was riding around Milwaukee, I didn't pair my phone or anything because I was swapping between the Road Glide and Street Glide over and over again. But this time I was able to set up Apple CarPlay and play around a little bit more with the infotainment system. What do you think of the overall dynamics of the CVO?
I like it. I think you get what you pay for in a CVO. I feel like, that bigger 121 with the variable valve time. And the biggest thing I noticed about it, and we might as well talk about the specs too. So you're looking at 115 horsepower. The 117 on the non-CVO, you're looking at 105. And then you have 139 foot-pounds of torque on the 121 variable valve timing. And on the 117, I think you're looking at 130 foot-pounds of torque. So a nice power bump. But I think the other thing too is what people don't always realize is on variable valve timing, that power is more readily available to you. I mean, you twist that throttle at 2,500, 3,000 RPM, you're going to feel it right away. And you also get better fuel economy as well. I think Harley-Davidson estimates 5% better fuel economy as well.
Yeah.
So a little bit more power throughout the entire range of the RPM spectrum and better fuel economy. It's a cool motor, and that's something that you get over the ST as well. And when I say ST, I mean the CVO Road Glide ST. So the CVO Road Glide ST, yes, you have higher peaky power, but for streetable, stoplight to stoplight, where you're constantly, slowing down, speeding up, a lot of people will probably prefer the 121 with variable valve timing.
Yeah, I was on the freeway, and I just wanted to remind myself. And one of the things I didn't get to do as much in Milwaukee as I wanted to was just a lot of highway stuff. We were on the bikes for quite some time, but it was a lot of city and some 2-lane stuff. But it was one of the things I want out of a Harley is I want to know that if I'm in 6th gear on the freeway and my bike's 2 up and I got a passenger and I'm loaded down, that I don't really have to downshift to go from 65 to 80 quickly. And this bike does better in that regard than pretty much any big twin from the factory does, including the Road Glide ST, because that variable valve timing, you said, it's the area under the curve. The peak numbers, while being better than the 117, it's not where that motor shines. It shines in the fact that you're closer to those peak numbers at any given point in the RPM range than you would be on the 117. So, you just have power wherever you want. And that's, for me, that's kind of what you want from a luxury experience. I don't want to have to downshift twice on my bagger to feel like I'm getting up to speed.
It's a lot of work, man. You got to tap that shift peg down. I mean,
shoot, I just want to go this, or maybe even just bump my cruise control up.
Exactly,
and just Jetsons myself, to whatever speed I'm at. So
you don't want to have to lift your left leg. I mean, come on.
What is this? Yeah, I think the motor, I mentioned it earlier, I just think it exudes that traditional Harley character. I mean, you're sitting at a light, your handlebars still move around a little bit. There's vibrations there to let you know the bike's alive, but it's really smooth. It's really effortless. You don't have to downshift if you don't want to. It runs really, really cool. Doesn't put a lot of heat off on your legs. It's really nice for long distance travel because the vibrations, once you're, in that 25 to 3,500 RPM range, you're basically,
it's a smooth motor. It's a very smooth motor.
Everything you love about the Milwaukee-Eight, but just a little bit more and a little bit cooler. And then, you're not stopping for gas as often if you don't want to, because you got the better fuel efficiency, so you get a little bit longer range. There's not much to dislike about it.
Yeah, and you got ride modes this year as well. So that's something that Harley-Davidson just introduced with this new body style. I mean, the 23 model year on the CVOs is ride modes, which has never been available on Harley-Davidson's Grand American touring line. I mean, we saw it on the Pan America in 21. The ride modes, it's something I've always kind of been skeptical of. I've seen other manufacturers do it on cruisers, and I always kind of argued and questioned, I guess, how applicable they were on a cruiser. But the more I ride with it and the more I have them available to me in different riding circumstances, the more I feel like, you know what, they are an applicable feature on the bike. For whatever reason, we always get caught in the rain. And so, rain mode's kind of nice, especially if you're out in the middle of nowhere and you really don't want to go down. You want to give yourself every advantage possible. You throw it in rain mode, and guess what? A slip of the wrist isn't going to break the rear wheel loose and put you down on a turn or something like that.
Harley does a good job, I think, of giving you, first of all, more parameters, especially in the custom mode, for you to be able to play around with things like engine braking and throttle response. But also, I think that their setup modifies things in a really useful way. Not only does sport mode make the throttle more responsive and give you more power, but it also adjusts, how the ABS and the traction control are working. So
tailors the rider aids.
Exactly. So, and that's something that's getting more and more common, but I find them to be mostly seamless. I think that kind of control is really nice, and it's where the new electronic suite in conjunction with the new display really kind of comes into its own. It just feels like a really sophisticated, modern implementation of technology, and it's done in a way where, especially with Apple CarPlay, most of the electronics just kind of go away once you've set it. And all they let you do better is focus on the stuff that you want to be focusing on. Because I'm not fidgeting with my phone on my handlebar and my Apple CarPlay is there, I can better trust that my Maps is doing what it should be doing, and I can look at the beautiful scenery around me. None of it detracted from the riding experience, and that's always my concern with electronics is, are they going to pull away from the experience more than they add? For me, especially on a bagger, they should be below the surface. They should be invisible, behind the scenes, doing what you want them to do. But be imperceptible other than making the experience better.
The infotainment system is a big change this year. You got a 12.3-inch infotainment screen now, which is 90% more viewable area. They took away all the analog gauges, which at first I was kind of like, I don't know, Harley-Davidson, they're all about the classic appeal and nature. Harley-Davidson riders, they expect the classic feel, look, and sound of a Harley-Davidson, right? And when you go, so much electronics, I always sometimes kind of worry. And, I got to say that after I've ridden this one with the big infotainment system and I rode like, my own personal bike, my Street Glide that has a lot of the analog gauges still. It was the right direction to go in. Harley made the right choice. The analog gauges, they're smaller, they're harder to read. And, you can now basically tailor the way you want your gauges to look. You got a cruise mode, which gives you your both big gauges that are bigger now than the analog gauges ever were. You're saving all the weight. Those analog gauges add weight to the fairing. If you want, you can go into tour mode, which makes your gauge footprint more minimalist, and you have this big space for your navigation or infotainment. Or you can go sport, where you just have like this one big tack in the middle with like a digital speedo in the middle. So, it's cool. You can change things to how you want. They're bigger. You can see them better. You have more information. The thing that I noticed too about the new infotainment system is you can get to what you're looking for a lot quicker with less button clicks as well. And maybe we should talk about the switch housings as well, because they are busier. You do have more buttons up there, which I think was kind of a gripe by a lot of people. Once again, okay, now we have more electronics, which the rider community in the Harley world is always resistant to. But something I noticed right away is you can get to where you're going very quickly. I can change my dash very quickly. I can see my tire pressure very quickly. I can make a phone call. I can switch to my navigation quickly. Which, by the way, speaking of navigation, the CVOs do come with Harley-Davidson's embedded navigation, whereas the non-CVO bikes do not come with Harley-Davidson's embedded navigation. I think, to your point, if you have an Apple device, you're going to probably prefer the Apple Maps, the CarPlay, over Harley-Davidson's embedded navigation. In my limited time with both of them, I still prefer Apple CarPlay over the Harley stuff. But some people don't want to run the headset, which does require you to run a headset.
At least you don't need the WIM anymore. Apple CarPlay is wireless, which is a nice thing to note.
You don't have to plug in your phone.
You don't have to plug it in, although there is a Type-C port in the drawer.
And the Street Glide drawer will actually fit a phone now, which is nice.
Yeah, I was actually able to talk to some of the engineers when I was in Milwaukee about the drawer. Honestly, a big part of why that drawer is there is because of rider feedback. I really like the Apple CarPlay. I think the onboard navigation is pretty darn good, but I, being an iPhone user, would pretty much always just use Apple CarPlay just because I'm familiar with it. And I can't remember if I mentioned, but unfortunately, Android Auto is no longer supported, not because of Harley, but because Google doesn't support motorcycles anymore. So if you like navigation, I'm just a big fan of Apple CarPlay. So I think that's probably going to be the best experience that you can probably have. And I had no issues with connectivity. Paired it. It always found my phone. It just asked me instantaneously, basically, if I wanted to go to Apple CarPlay once everything was paired up properly. So it was quite seamless, and I really liked it. So it does make me want a bagger more, which is upsetting, but that's a good thing.
Yeah, and I think too, the electronics are awesome, but I think the overall riding experience of these CVOs with the suspension change and the engine change and the new body style with the new fairing and the wind dynamics of that, I think the overall riding experience is just better. The suspension felt better. The handling of the bike, although the weight isn't too much different. Yeah, there were some weight savings areas that Nick mentioned earlier, like in the tank, especially in the front end. But I just feel like the bikes are more nimble and lighter on their feet. Maybe it's because a lot of the weight came off the front end. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but there was a lot of, I think they call it fluid dynamics testing on the fairings, where you just have a lot of like technology now that can really test these fairings and how the wind properties are coming off of the fairing. I think they did their due diligence there. Cutting through the wind, I felt like the fairing did a really good job at keeping the wind off of my body as a whole. I'm a little bit taller than the average rider, and so I personally would put a taller windshield on there to keep some of the wind off me. Yeah, the CVOs are just a really good overall package, for the guy that just wants all the premium finishes and the hand controls, the stiffer front end, a little bit better feel and bite in the front brakes, bigger motor, got things like, the remote locking bags on there, the cover that comes with the bike. You also get one of Harley-Davidson's new Cardo headsets with the CVO Street Glide as well. And so there's just a lot of cool little things that you get on this bike that a lot of riders are going to spend their money on anyways. And so if you want all those things, plus the things that you never really can buy, like a variable valve timing on your bike, you can't, that's not an installable item. Yeah. And so if you want that stuff, you're going to put a bunch of fancy stuff on your bike anyways, and you want a really cool exclusive paint set that's recognized by the motor company. I mean, and then you want a bike that, MSRP is recognized from the factory. It did go up $1,500 this year. They're $44,500 for the non-legendary orange version of it. But you know your bike is always going to be worth more than the guy that spends the 26 on a standard Street Glide and then spends $10,000 in parts on it. So
it's a lot of value added to the standard model for sure. I do think that there was a few things that I was hoping to see. I was hoping that the CVOs would have slightly different lighting than the regular bikes.
Agreed, yeah.
I feel like it does take away a little bit when almost none of the bodywork on the bike is unique to the CVO. And none of the lighting is really unique to the CVO.
Yeah, the tail lights and all the rear fascia on a CVO used to be totally unique. Now the rear fascia is exactly the same.
Yeah, bags are the same. There still are some things that are really cool that are unique, obviously, to the bike, like the engine casing. That's like a small little detail thing that most people maybe not even notice, but is really cool. But for me, it's something I've said multiple times. If it's a CVO, I want to see some unique bodywork, something that's beyond just the paint and the really nice features that add a lot of value. And if you're going to spend the money on an inverted front end, and if you're going to upgrade your sound system, and if you're going to do a lot of this stuff, you'll easily spend more than you would on a CVO. So the value is still there. But I think that the wow factor pizzazz is a little bit diminished now from last year when you were getting all new bodywork that no one else had. And now it's almost a testament to how good the regular Street Glide is, that the value proposition in terms of the specialness factor is a little bit diminished.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. We saw things like in the 09 model year when they came out with the stretched bags for the CVO Road Glide. It was like, whoa, you get stretched bags, and it was easily identifiable that was a CVO. And then they did things like the Fang spoilers, and I think the 2019 model year. And so I agree with you. Unique body work to the CVOs is a really big differentiation feature for the CVOs that unfortunately Harley-Davidson didn't do on the Street Glide.
It's a little upsetting because something like the Road Glide ST, it's got the forged carbon fender, it's got the unique,
remote reservoirs on the shocks.
And it's less expensive. Yeah. And so I wish that it had a different tank trim piece or something from the cockpit that really screamed, like a backlit center console or something. It was like, wow, yeah. Harley they spent a huge amount of money on this thing because it's just so different or so unique. And so
you do have backlit switches on the CVOs that you don't get on the regular Street Glide.
And again, that's awesome, but it's one of those more functional things. I feel like there's a lot of functional benefit to the CVO, like over the regular bike. It's louder, it's faster, it handles better, it rides better, it's got better brakes. There's almost every objective category of the CVO is an improvement over the regular bike.
But visually, you think there should be more.
Yeah. I think, especially if you don't opt for the legendary orange, it could just look to me a little bit like a really, really well-optioned Street Glide.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the inverted front end is a really big point.
And the wheels.
And I think a lot of people expected the inverted front end to come out on the non-CVO version of the Street Glide and Road Glide this year. And I was like, no, I don't really agree with that. I think it's really nice that Harley-Davidson put that front end. That's obviously a more expensive front end to manufacture and make. They reserved that for the CVO buyers. And they kept the price point on the Road Glide and the Street Glide as low as possible, which they accomplished that in a big way. $25,999, that's the lowest it's been in like 6-7 years, as a base price. And so, they reserved that for the CVO. And plus the wheels, I think the wheels are a big feature that make the CVOs stand out. But I agree with your point, though, Nick. It would be nice to have some type of lighting feature or like rear fascia or something to make it more identifiable as a CVO.
Even if they don't know what a CVO is, I want them to know there's something
special.
Weird going on with that one, right?
Yeah,
there.
This one is exceptionally badass.
Yeah. Why is this that? Yeah. But overall, I'd say that I only have very small, minor nitpicks. Everything else about the bike is incredible. Handles really, really good. Stops really, really good. The electronics are really well integrated. It's really comfortable. It's significantly more comfortable. A taller ride height in the rear doesn't actually translate to a harder time reaching. I can flat foot it just as well as I can flat foot the old specials, which were technically shorter and rode a lot worse than the new CVO does. The ergonomics are really, really good.
The seats are nice. While we're talking about comfort and ergonomics, might as well talk about the seat. They look beautiful and they're significantly more comfortable. The padding, like the internals of the seat, are definitely better. Yep. It's a seat that I would actually ride for 300-400 miles in a day.
The overall bike, there's just not much to complain about. You can nitpick here and there, like we've done, because I think it's always helpful on a $44,000 product to nitpick, because that's where you really should be nitpicking stuff. But you got to look around to find things that are easy to complain about. So
Yeah.
I enjoyed the bike. Even in pothole, cratered out Milwaukee, I didn't have any complaints. I had a blast the whole time. But yeah, I think that basically sums it up. The Street Glide CVO is wonderful. I was surprised by the fact that the spec sheet says, it's got 4 more cubes and it's got a little bit more suspension travel and it weighs a little bit less. That when I rode it, it was dramatically different. It was,
you combine all those small parts and, cumulative effect is it's a big, just overall better riding experience.
Yeah. So if you haven't had a chance to test ride a 2024 model, whether it's a CVO or not a CVO, I highly recommend it, especially if you're coming from a Rushmore bike. So maybe a 14 or a 15 or a 16 Street Glide, and so you still have the old twin cam. If you don't want to buy one, then don't. But don't test ride it, but because you'll end up doing it. But if you're at all curious, I would highly recommend it. If you're able to test ride the CVO as well, I would highly recommend it too, because it is a nice bump over the regular models. But the regular models are also just totally kick ass at this point too. So
Harley's got a good offering this year. These are the years that we always talk about, and like I talk about Harley's history a lot, and this is going to be one of those model years where we're going to be referencing for the next 2-3 decades, because it's just one of those significant change. I mean, there's so many changes, and obviously we saw these changes last year with the CVOs, but now we have the majority of Harley-Davidson's touring family with these new fairings. We haven't seen it on the Road Glide Limited or the Ultra Limited yet. Yeah, I think too, I'll just say to close out as well, just, the bikes are just more visually striking in my opinion. These designers have a tremendous job when they design something that's as iconic as a Batwing fairing that Harley's been using since 1969. It's got to appeal to people on so many different levels. Harley-Davidson's riding community can be very critical, especially if you don't respect the past and respect Harley-Davidson's traditional styling. And so I think Harley-Davidson really straddled that line very well in terms of respecting the traditional look of the Batwing fairing, but also modernizing it in a very tasteful way.
I think, talking about the appearance of the new bodywork, they pushed it just far enough. I think it was maybe 10% past most people's comfort zone for change.
Yeah.
But that means as soon as you go from the 23 to the 24 model year, people are kind of like, oh, no, it's growing on me. Good. It's nice now. 25, 26, I think it's going to come into its total own, where suddenly people are going to be looking at the old Batwing, no offense to you, Matt, and being like, okay, now it looks kind of dated.
I think the Street Glide was in need of a refresh more than the Road Glide. I think there were still a lot of people that were very much in love with the Rushmore Road Glide fairing. It kind of was the poster child for the performance bagger movement.
Yeah.
When you see that Road Glide fairing, that is the performance bagger movement. And so I feel like there were still a lot of people that are very attached to that fairing. But I think the Street Glide fairing for a lot of people was just a little bit dated, a little too traditional. The fairing that people kind of identified with the Ultra Limited, which is a bike that not everybody wants to identify with because it's the touring grandpa glide or whatever. So I think the refresh on the Street Glide is a bigger jump for me than the Road Glide fairing is. I just think that the Street Glides are just a lot more appealing now with that new fairing.
It's a really visually striking design. I think the running lights are really nice. The integration with the turn signals are really nice. Cleans up the whole front end. Overall, the fairing design and the aesthetic, it's just a lot more aggressive, a lot more modern. It looks really, really nice. So,
yeah, I think it looks good.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot for watching, guys. Appreciate you checking out this 24 model year CVO Street Glide video. And if you guys have any questions, as always, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. Nick and I will try to respond to as many questions as we can. And as always, if you're looking for a newer used Harley-Davidson in Southern California, make sure you check us out here at Laidlaw's Harley-Davidson. If you haven't already, make sure you hit that subscribe button to check out our future content. Thanks for watching, guys. We'll see you on the next one. Later.